Great. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Ashley Smith. I am the Older Adult Program Coordinator at Rainbow Resource Center. I use he, him pronouns, and I basically created a presentation that is about um, well, as Jan had put on the poster, it's about Winnipeg and Rainbow Resource Center. Usually I do a presentation about that tells the story of 2S LGBTQ plus older adults and their life experiences, but I figured that that would be kind of speaking to the audience in this case. So I've just kind of put together a presentation that's about Winnipeg, and it's and just like I'll tell you about Winnipeg. Maybe you're not from here or you've never been here, and then also I'll talk about the 2S LGBTQ plus history here, and then Rainbow and what we're working on here at Rainbow. So thanks for coming and thanks for your curiosity. And I'll just share my screen. Just give me 1 second.
So just to give everybody a heads up, we're actually trying something new. We've run successful weekly programs for the last year and a half, but this time we're trying to do it in person at the Sage Seniors.
Oh, okay.
And we're trying a video feed with their brand new Skookum camera. So we're hoping that we can go back to being in person with people. So we're doing it partially by Zoom and partially with live people. So bear with us, Ashley, while we get it together.
That's fine. But can I go? Is that all right if I start going?
You're sharing.
You're sharing okay, that's fine. Great. I wonder, can you see me as well? Yeah. Okay, good. Because I don't want you to miss the sight of me talking with my hands. That's half the show. So, yeah, as you've learned, you've heard my profile from the Rainbow Resource Center website. My background is in leadership and communications, but communication specifically. For many years I worked in social media marketing. It was pretty boring. I was literally selling concrete, as in maybe you've heard of Centerport before, which is a gigantic inland port in Winnipeg, and I was helping them sell tearing down Paradise to put up a parking lot, and that just didn't jive with my jam. So at the same time, I started working for an organization called Canadian Virtual Hospice, and maybe you've heard of them before. They've created a lot of, they're located here in Winnipeg, but they created a resource that was specific to 2S LGBTQ plus older adults about planning for advanced care and later life. And I helped them with their outreach. So I reached out to 2S LGBTQ plus and ally organizations all across Canada, and specifically on topics about older adult issues. And it just opened my eyes to the need of the cohort, but also just how much I really wanted to work with the community. So when I finished up that project, I reached out to Rainbow Resource Center here and I said, if you have anything that is older adult issues, I want in on it. And they were hiring at that time. And so about 2 years ago, I became the older adult program coordinator here. Like I said, I just kind of put it together this presentation. There will be some slides that I'm going to linger on a little bit longer and not necessarily talk about what's on there, because it was a bit harder than I thought to find pictures that reflect the story that I'm trying to tell. But what we are going to talk about is, of course, we're going to get to know Winnipeg a little bit better for those of you who aren't familiar with it. And also we're going to talk about the major events and places and people in Winnipeg's 2S LGBTQ plus history. We're going to talk about the Rainbow Resource Center, which is Canada's longest serving 2S LGBTQ plus organization. We are celebrating 50 years next year. And I'm just going to also touch on some exciting projects that are coming up for the center, especially this coming year, but going forward as well. Then I will obviously leave time for questions, because I bet you there's going to be some questions about some of the things. So just a couple of things right off the hop. I'm just going to let you know that I'm going to be using the acronym 2S LGBTQ+. That is the acronym that we use here at Rainbow Resource Center. For those of you who don't know, that it's 2S as in two spirit, as and it goes in the front to reflect the history and the fact that the indigenous culture was here first, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer and questioning, and inclusive. I may also sometimes use queer or queer and trans. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the usage of that, it's a single reclaimed umbrella term that reflects the individuals that comprise the community and the community itself. I may also sometimes, I can't imagine in this presentation, but sometimes I let the big word heteronormative come out of my mouth. And that's just reflecting the system where heterosexuality and the roles of men and women in that code are the normal preferred way of speaking or of being done. Sometimes also I just use gay. And you know what? It's because I am, and I find it a little bit easier to say gay instead of 2S LGBTQ plus every single time. So if you're uncomfortable with that, brace yourself. I'm just going to use gay sometimes. So also, I just have to acknowledge that I am a white settler cisgender male. I have all my health. I do experience a lot of privilege based on that, but I work every single day to use my privilege to make life easier for those who are less privileged. And also, I just want to touch on the fact that I'm going to be talking about 2S LGBTQ plus history. And when I talk about it as a white cisgender gay male, I obviously am sort of like looking through a small hole at a bigger picture. I obviously respect the whole story, and I find the whole story fascinating. So but as fascinating as that story is, it does get tough sometimes. So if you are finally finding something I'm saying unsettling, I encourage you to turn off your camera, take a break, but do come back, because I promise it's not all doom and gloom. And of course, since I'm about to start talking about Winnipeg, it's really important to acknowledge that Rainbow Resource Center is located on Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabeg, Dakota Yoyote, Denisulan, and Nahitawak nations. We also acknowledge that we're located on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. Here at the center, we respect the treaties that were made on these territories, including Treaty 3 territory, which provides us with water, and Treaty 5, the electricity that generates this whole presentation. As a center, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous and Two-Spirit communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So just to get started, I would love to see a raise of hands, but I'll never see all the hands. But I'm curious how many of you Edmontonians have been to, or Albertans, or from wherever you're tuning in from. However, how many of you have been to Manitoba, or specifically Winnipeg? Great, so you're going to be super bored by this part of the presentation because it'll sound like a grade 9 geography class. Just so you know, I am actually originally from Ottawa. I moved here from Ottawa in the Ottawa Valley in 2010. So I've been learning about this wonderful city and province and its challenges and its strengths since then, and love this place. So for those of you who don't know, we're located right at the longitudinal center of Canada. That means this way. And we're at the geographic center of North America. There's a spot on the highway just outside of town where everybody stops to get their picture taken. Manitoba is kind of a unique province in that it's sort of laid on the edge of the Canadian Shield right before the prairies. It's kind of a little dip, a pothole, if you will. And that is because of Manitoba's geology which stems from its history as an ancient Great Lake called Lake Agassiz that no longer exists. The remains of it are basically the river systems, the Assiniboine and the Red River, and also the two lakes, Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba, which kind of make up the middle of the lakes. They're quite huge lakes. They should be represented on this map, but they're not there. Just so you know, we're really close to the border. There's not very much between here and the border. It's about an hour's drive to Emerson. And from there, you'd go on to Fargo and Grand Forks. And those southern communities are pretty religious based. It's heavily Mennonite and Hutterite, and pretty pretty religious, I would say. I think you can relate to that in Alberta, those kinds of communities. The communities to the north are mostly Icelandic immigrants, so there's kind of a heavy Viking culture, but then also there's indigenous communities up there as well in the interlake between the two lakes, and then up higher, way up north. Not a lot of people get to go up there where the polar bears are. So then a little bit more about Winnipeg. When I was a kid growing up, I didn't even know, besides knowing it was the capital of a province on a map, I didn't really know very much about it. But Manitoba's capital is, sorry, rather, Winnipeg is Manitoba's capital and largest city with a population of about 750,000. But just to put it into perspective about the population of Manitoba, the next largest city has 51,000, which is Brandon. And then down from that is like 18,000 in Steinbach, and Winkler only 13,000. So the population is pretty small in Manitoba. Everybody's in Winnipeg. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. I'm sure the people outside the perimeter would be not too excited that I just said everybody's in Winnipeg, but there's a lot. We're pretty much all in Winnipeg. Whenever I bring my family to Winnipeg, I hit up the biggest tourist spots: the Forks, Portage in Maine, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, which is Canada's only national museum outside of the capital region. There's the Manitoba Museum and the Exchange District, which is the old downtown that hasn't changed since I don't know, since the 1900s, early 1900s. And then there's the Legislative Building. Winnipeg is also really popular for filming Christmas and horror movies. Even in the deep heat of July, you'll drive around and see towns that have been sprayed with Christmas decorations and snow, and it's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, and then we see these movies on, and they're pretty low quality movies that are made here. But yeah, you never know who's going to be the next celebrity you see. And also fun fact, Winnipeg was the first place in the world to develop 911. Winnipeg actually takes its love of emergencies very seriously. In case you didn't know, Manitoba floods every year, and my partner used to run the emergency measures organization here. So my knowledge of the history of flooding in Manitoba is pretty extensive. And also we're home to the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, which is Canada's oldest and North America's longest serving ballet company. So as I promised, and as I'm sure you're way more interested in knowing, we're going to talk now about Winnipeg's 2S LGBTQ plus history. I just want to also do a little shout out here that the Rainbow Resource Center has a pretty close relationship with the University of Manitoba's Gay and Lesbian Archives. I really encourage you to reach or do some digging in there if you ever want to learn more about the topics I'm going to talk about. I'm also just going to take a second to acknowledge that really I'm just doing a pretty brief overview of everything. I was just hosting our weekly in-person coffee and chat and with the older adults, and I had them, sort of like remind me of a few hot points that maybe I missed while I was putting together this presentation. And of course, they had some input, so we'll get started. So when I think about the history of the 2S LGBTQ plus movement in Winnipeg, the story must begin with the spaces that existed. Long before everything here, there were, long before the 70s, there were places called, I think the one was called Mardi Gras, and it was down by the Eaton Center. And it was like, you went upstairs and you sat at the table at the back, and that's how you knew that you were in the gay place. There was also a beer hall, like a beer lounge, I think they call them. Pretty shady place where the lesbians and the intersex people of the 50s and 60s hung out. It was basically prostitutes and lesbians, and pretty rough scene. But in the 70s, everything started to change in Winnipeg. And though that first picture you see of Happening Social Club, that's as it looks today, but Happening Social Club was the place to go. And from the stories I hear, it was open from the 70s all the way through to the 80s. And from the stories I hear, it was the best place to go. It was, if you're a gay person or a lesbian or however you identify and you love dancing, in the disco era in the 80s, that was the place to go and do it. Controversially, though, it was so it operated on a membership plan where you only got in if you knew somebody who was there. You paid a membership, and it was very not exclusive. It was protective, and it meant that only people you knew could get in, and you were safe inside. But in the probably the mid to late, no, it was probably like 74 or so, they applied for a liquor license from the provincial government, and they, after much, hush hush, I can't believe that they're asking for it, they finally allowed happenings to have a liquor license, but there was an ultimatum. They could have it, but they couldn't advertise. And so just bear that in mind while I'm talking here. So those who went there and drank now, and they were very happy they could do so, but there just wasn't something, there was something not right fundamentally about not being able to advertise. So obviously in 1969, that's when the Stonewall riots happened, and all across the states there was a wave of social activism about gay rights. And a young chap from rural Manitoba, his name was Phil Graham. He was studying in one of the states just across the border, slips my mind suddenly, Minnesota, I want to say. And he had been working on a paper there, a social activism paper and a newspaper, and he came home and he saw what was happening at Happenings, and he just saw that like really the only place for gay people to meet in Winnipeg was Happenings, a place where you drank. And he thought, you know what, we should have a space where like-minded, non-drinking, people who just want to kind of organize our rights get together. And so he organized a group at the University of Manitoba. And eventually that group became what was known as Gays for Equality. And Gays for Equality still exists. Gays for Equality is Rainbow Resource Center today. So maybe a spoiler alert, I still work for Gays for Equality in one way or another. So at that time, or that group that met at the University of Manitoba, they came up with a lot of great ideas. And one of them was something that became known as Giovanni's Room, or the Oscar Wilde Society. And Giovanni's Room was sort of an alternative to Happenings, and it included things like a library, and you could just go and eat there. You could just go and hang out. It was sort of a social space that was more about bringing minds together, which was new for the time. And it would end up lasting 30 years in one way or another. Eventually it would become Geo's, which was really just a club. And it was open to the public, which meant that it could, it had its own share of damage being done by vandals and haters, we'll say, and also violence out at the front door. But without understanding these places, it's really hard to this is important to know about the history of Winnipeg's 2S LGBTQ plus history, because they were the places that we went. Another place that the people went, especially, well, specifically the gay men, was behind the Ledge building here, as in the legislative building. So there's the front portico with the columns, and then if you go to the back, in those days there was a lot of lilac bushes, and that was a very popular meeting place to go and have sex, and it was sort of considered a safe space, sort of like an unspoken safe space. Especially that avenue that ran behind the building called Assiniboine. It was basically a circuit that cars would go around, and people who remember those days remember it was a very bustling, busy place. And even though people were taking their life into their hands to go there, of course they went. And but in the mid to late 90s, there was a murder there, and it was a hate crime. His name was Gordon Cuddy, who died, and he was assaulted by somebody who didn't like him. And because of that, they didn't crack down on hate crimes. No, they redesigned the backspace behind the ledge building, tearing out the lilac bushes and changing the street so you couldn't go drive in a loop anymore. But every once in a while, you can still go behind the ledge building and see some folks that remember the good days. So I just thought I'd touch briefly on some people from that time who were kind of visionaries of the future. As I said before, Phil Graham, who's pictured here at the top, he started the group called Gays for Equality, and he united the gay organizations of town in a way that I don't think has ever happened since. There were organizations much like the Cirque or the Sunshine House that we have today, but they were groups that came together to fight for one cause in the early 70s. Winnipeg hosted Canada's second annual National Gay Conference, and at that time, it was in 1974, the parade and the protests that happened were essentially the first unofficial Pride. Just last summer, I hosted a speaking series, much like this one, where I hosted Legends of Pride, I called it. And I had Phil Graham, who is now in his 80s, and he's blind, and he is a feisty guy. And he told his story about that time. And then I ended up actually walking with him arm in arm in the Pride Parade here this year. Honestly, what an honor it was to meet him. He ended up winning an award in 2019, I'm going to say, about all his work in activism since the 70s. Not only is he a gay rights activist, but he's also an Indigenous rights activist and also a disability or accessibility rights activist. And honestly, great person. Another interesting chapter from Winnipeg's history is something that was called the Winnipeg Gay Media Collective. And you will, I'm about to talk about Chris Vogel and Rich North a bit more, but it was formed by them at the university, and it really set the stage. It was like way ahead of its time. In the late 70s, it started as a radio show that was mostly based on, it was kind of like, mostly like a religious conversation based on the New Metropolitan Church. I think that's what it's called, right? The New Metropolitan Church. And I see some nods there. Thank you. And they basically ran that as a radio show. And then in the 80s, it went to public broadcasting television. And I was just talking with my older adults, and some of them remember obviously how mostly it was boring, talk show format. They would have in speakers and very stiff, they would wear their ties and they were buttoned up shirts and they were looking very professional. Of course, they were setting a precedent, right? They wanted to look professional and sort of almost like, no pun intended, straight laced. But for some folks there who are now like the younger of the older adults, they remember those shows as the first time anybody said gay on TV, or even, showed them what San Francisco Pride was like. And for that younger of the older generation, it was game changing. Especially here in Winnipeg, pretty outposty kind of town. It was a big deal. And then, of course, I'm gonna really drive it home here with the Chris Vogel and Richard North. While they are national figures, they are pretty much hometown heroes. For those of you who don't know, they were in 1974. They got married in a church. Obviously, this was way before the legalization of gay marriage, and so when they tried to register it, it was denied in the Vital Statistics Office, and there the fight began. And so they fought for the right to have their marriage recognized. And then all of a sudden Canada started recognizing gay marriages. But when they started to have it, or wanted to have it sort of retrograded to the retroactive to their original marriage, after much fighting, that was denied. The reason it was denied in their view, I talk to Rich all the time, is because simply the law didn't apply at that time, so they didn't want to recognize it. If for those of you who have been to Winnipeg, perhaps you've been to the National or the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and they have an exhibit there, or rather they are featured in an exhibit about human rights, and they not without controversy, and they anyway, well, while I could tell you a story about that museum, but you know what, let's not dwell on the museum. The museum is a story for another time. So some more famous faces from here. So I'm sure there's more. And honestly, again, I just kind of went with my gut on this one and found the first ones. But many people don't realize that the term Two-Spirit, especially the way we use it today, came out of Manitoba. And it was Myra Laramie, who's actually just not well these days, but she is a Cree professor, and she had a vision, and it was in time for a North American assembly of Indigenous peoples here in Manitoba. And to that assembly, she brought the language Two-Spirit into the modern form we have it today. I think that's such a fun fact to know, and not a lot of people even here know that. Also, if you watch the news at all, you would have seen Glenn Murray on the news recently. He recently re-ran for mayor and lost. But there was a time before that in 98 to 2004 where he was the mayor, the 41st. He was the first openly gay mayor of a major city in Canada. And the general consensus from that time is that he was a really nice guy and super well liked. And he did some pretty interesting things, as in he built the L'Esplanade Bridge here, which is pretty much the gayest bridge you can imagine. And thank goodness he did that. Groundbreaker for sure. And also, oh, sorry, I just realized that's his behavior modification therapy. Oops, sorry, I meant to say Shane. I lifted that from a I lifted that from a previous presentation, but Shandy Strong is the bottom picture there. Shandy Strong was the first openly transgender person in Western Canada to run for the provincial office. If you don't know who Shandy Strong is, I really encourage you to Google her. She wrote a book about her story. She's just really a powerhouse speaker and a rallier of trans rights. She organized the first trans Pride Parade here. And the speeches are amazing, honestly, really a star. Okay, so that's kind of the history. Honestly, that is really the basic of the history. I think that a couple of things that I didn't mention was something called Miss Purdy's, which was a lesbian bar that was here. And it was kind of a unique space where sorry, I'm just going to go back so that we kind of don't skip ahead. But Purdy's was a lesbian bar, and it was like, you know, only women went there. And, you know, if you were a man and you went to Purdy's, you didn't get served. And the lesbians that I work with, they love that their history includes that place. Obviously, it was before my time. I wish I could go and not get served there. I don't know, something like that. Also, in 1987, Manitoba included sexual orientation in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms here, and it wrapped up 3 days of debates, and they made the decision at 3 a.m., probably thinking they could just slip it under the rug and nobody would notice, but immediately there were celebrations in the streets, and that day was the day that Pride in Winnipeg really started. Yeah, so while it would take that was the first Pride in 1987, and then it would take a couple more years for it to become official that Pride was happening, but I'm sure it's really no different in any major city. But yeah, one of the people that was who took part in the 3 days of debates, specifically speaking to how gays aren't pedophiles, basically, like not all gays are pedophiles. She worked in the child services industry, and she was a lesbian, and she got up and she started speaking, and I was just hearing her story once again just earlier, and honestly, the stuff that she had to put up with just to make us not look like monsters. It's honestly amazing. So as you can tell, I really like working with the older adults in this group. This is literally the best job that I've ever had. So sometimes I may get a little sentimental about my folks, but yeah. So Rainbow Resource Center, maybe you've heard of it, maybe not. As I said before, Canada's longest serving 2S LGBTQ plus center. I mean, we're just a center. It's just on a street, just like any other place, but we serve a lot of people every day. And the stories that come in and out of this place, I mean, they break your heart. Sometimes they also warm your heart, because thank God we're a community and we can come to this place and, just as earlier, sit around a table and talk about the stories of the places and people that were and are, and also about the language and the way we're going in the future. We bring together generations, and it's a really exciting place to do that. So as I said earlier, Rainbow Resource Center is a direct descendant, as I say, of Phil Graham's Gays for Equality. We've kind of changed locations throughout, only twice, well, once we moved from the university to once we moved from the university to the Giovanni's room was technically one of the locations. Then we moved to a call center at Confusion Corner, which is a pretty popular intersection here, but it was still kind of like just one small office in another building. And then we moved to this location, which you see pictured here, in the 90s, late 90s, and we're about to move, but I'll get to that in a minute. So the reasons that we moved, or what happened every time that we moved, is basically there was a shift in our general or most important mission. So while, during the 70s, there was a lot of equal rights fights going on. Obviously, things seemed to relax on that subject. So in the 90s, as AIDS was crushing the community, we received funding to start a public health awareness campaign, and that really was the impetus to what we became today. And so now we operate on providing not safe consumption, but safe substance use, harm reduction, sorry, thank you, harm reduction supplies, and also sexual education and diversity training. And as I say here, youth program. The youth program really took off in the early 2000s. And what's really interesting about the youth program is, well, first of all, it was immediately super popular. And the generation that started to come at that time is now the leadership that we have here today. So for example, Noreen Meehan, who is our executive director, she took part in the youth program here. She went on to other things later on in life, and she was very thankful for that time. And now she's come back to work here. It's like a full circle situation. She's not the only one. Many other people who work here came through the youth program, and it changed their life. I don't blame them, honestly. I wish I'd had this place when I was younger, growing up where I grew up. It would have been a life changer. FYI, these are just stock photos, but it was just to reflect the idea that intergenerational programming here at Rainbow Resource Center is super important. But other things that we provide right now is information and resources. As I said, from our front desk, Bryce hands out harm reduction supplies. We have a food hamper here that is ever growing in need, rather like the need for it is growing. And also we started working with like the local grocery stores to get food that is about to be expired or just expired to be delivered here. And within every week, the food is gone immediately. We also have we sort of touted it as one of the largest 2S LGBTQ plus libraries in Western Canada. I'm not sure if that still applies. Maybe at one time it did. I'm not sure, but the library is amazing, and we've got all the classics as well as all the new stuff. As you might guess, I'm a big fan of the classics. So knowledge is power. We also provide professional education. So like we call it diversity, inclusion, and affirmation training to organizations across Canada, actually. It's a 6-hour presentation. We also offer bite-sized YouTube lessons. Those things cost money. It's one of our drivers of revenue. We also have GSA consultation services. GSAs being gay straight alliances, primarily in schools, it's challenging for many of the rural class or rural schools. Even if they do end up creating a GSA, the struggle to keep it a safe space is an ongoing battle. And Dean, who runs that program, is always working to keep it safe for the students, not for the parents, which is basically one of the greatest conundrums of our modern age. So we also have 3 counselors that are available to the public, and because obviously mental health is health. We have just during COVID, we got a counselor specific for our older adults. She's busy all the time. And the youth program, which, as I was talking about before, they serve 11 to 18-year-olds. It's highly in demand. Their program basically just is a constant. It's a constant. They have what's called a Discord. For those of you who don't know, it's like a social media platform. It's a chat space, a virtual space. And then they also have in-person programming, such as sharing circles, painting classes. They did a karaoke night for Halloween. And as I said earlier, we're going to do an intergenerational bunch of stuff coming up in December. And Over the Rainbow, which is the 55 plus group, which is what I run. And we have, I have about 150 participants in my program. 50 of them are regulars. And we have virtual programming, which started during COVID. It's very popular. It's staying, and it's not going anywhere. The in-person programming is for those who prefer in-person, and it's doing just fine, just the same. We just had a coffee and chat, and there was about 16 of us in there, and just gabbing it up, having a great time, a gay old time, as we say. So this is the future of Rainbow. As I sort of suggested earlier, there is going to be a move coming up. We just, within the last 6 months, we purchased, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but this old house here, which is called Wilson House, or, well, that's all you need to know. It's a historic house, and it is, so this property that is beside it here, this will be, when it is completed, unless of course the Edmonton people hurry and they win, we will be the first 2S LGBTQ plus affirming seniors housing in Canada, we believe. We've done a lot of research. It's so whenever you say you're a first, it is so stressful because you really want to make sure you are, but I'm pretty sure we are. So so the programming, for example, you'll see it right down here in the bottom corner. There's going to be a coffee shop on the main floor, and in behind here on the bulk of the building will be where programming such as our older adult programming and the youth programming will take place. Counseling and education will all be in here, and as well as staff. And then up here on 4 floors is affirming seniors housing for deeply deeply affordable housing is how we word it. Just some fun facts or some clarification on this. Rainbow Resource Center is working in partnership with something called Westminster Housing. And they are the professionals at running housing and building housing for nonprofits. Right across the street over this way, there is another one that they did, and in partnership with a church that's right there. So, and they run a youth program out of the bottom. So but it's a United Church. They're nice. So this is in line with our brand, working with this organization, and they're going to run the housing portion of this building. So we won't even have anything to do with tabling people or getting up for when people apply. I mean, we're taking the names. Trust me, people are pounding on the door to be let in, but it's a pretty small space and they're going to be in control of it. Right now, all it looks like is a hole in the ground, but in a few weeks, my executive director and I will be moving over there and we'll sort of all transition over there, and all of us will be living in this house by July. And then by the end of the year, we suspect we'll be in this space. And then this is the third phase of the process. I know many of you are probably curious about that. That's why I kind of lingered on that, because I know that, I believe anyway, that Edmonton Pride Senior Network is working on a housing project, I believe. Anyway, I hope I didn't blow the thing on that. Another really interesting project I'm working on right now, I just had my first meeting about it yesterday, is a museum exhibit. It's called If These Walls Could Talk. It's 50 years of 2S LGBTQ plus activism in Winnipeg. It's told through the posters that were up around the center. So during COVID, during one of the biggest lockdowns, our admin person, who obviously wasn't opening the door for people, had a project of cleaning out the basement here and came across a gigantic stash of posters. And they were archiving them when I arrived, and when I arrived, I said, wow, those should be in a museum. And here we are, and I'm about to do it. So I can't wait. So the museum exhibit is going to be opening in time for Pride. It's part of our 50th anniversary celebrations. And I'm going to be working with some people who were involved in various aspects or various chapters of Winnipeg's history to make sure that we're telling the story correctly. And it's going to be amazing. The idea is to inspire and remind, not only remind folks who were there what happened and how far we've come, but also to inspire youth about how vigilant you have to be and how hard you have to work to ensure change happens and then stays changed. So yeah, so that's the idea of that. And really, that's it. I mean, I want to make sure that I leave time for questions. I'm going to give you some people, maybe sometimes I encourage you to send me an email if you want to get in touch with me or learn more about anything. You can reach me at otr@rainbowresourcecenter.org, or hey, even give me a call. I'm usually just sitting here, so please do. So yeah, I'm just going to stop sharing. Stop sharing. There we go. And here I am. So please, I encourage questions.
That's most impressive, Ashley. Thank you for that. Does any participants have any comments or questions for Ashley? I must admit, I'm only seeing the partial screen, so maybe you could use.
I don't see any hands moving. Oh, sorry. Do you have a question, Michael? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
First comment, thanks very much, Ashley, for the presentation and going through both the past as well as what you're doing currently. And on the current, I would just say, I think if you're successful with the building, you'd be the first gay lesbian residents affirming. We actually have residents here that is affirming, but it is not a gay lesbian. But they're affirming seniors.
Right. Affirming is a tricky word, right? Because it can be like the United Church affirming. So it's a mouthful though. 2S LGBTQ plus affirming affordable housing. That's a big one.
Right.
But
right. All I'm saying is that because their connection initially was with United Churches, that they actually are affirming. They've gone through a process. They have a separate blah blah blah. All I'm saying is that yours in terms of residents would be first. We thought we were going to be first, but whatever.
It's a friendly competition.
Yeah.
We're all in this together.
Yeah. The other question, though, that, and maybe eventually we'll follow up a little bit with you, is you had at the conference that was held in November, I think, or maybe it's October. I've already, the months skip past. You had a small thing at the end about looking at something in terms of a national perspective. And I do think there may be
Oh,
something.
I know what you mean. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I do think there might be something for that. I don't think that was the right group there that day, kind of thing that, but I do think that that might be something worth doing.
A national sort of coalition of older adult associations. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, don't worry about it. It's on the you can't see it, but right here on my desk is a gigantic list. I'll say it's very organized, and it is all the things coming up. So don't worry about it. I got you, Michael. I'm working on it.
Well, maybe I'll follow up eventually with a call. Perhaps if you suggest, I was interested what you're in, and also about where you might want to go and where you might not want to go, kind of thing.
Exactly. I'm totally open to talking about it.
Yeah. Okay.
With Robert too. Robert, I see you're there from Saskatoon, so Robert should be there too.
No,
anybody else got a question though? Judy, please. You're muted, by the way. Yeah, Senior Pride. Hi from Niagara. My gosh, wow.
Yes, I'm with the Senior Pride Network Niagara.
Sure.
And I attended the Planning with Pride as well. And I was just wondering, are the recorded sessions, are they still in the process? I'm not trying to rush or anything.
No, you know what I've noticed is because I sent out the email to 200 and almost 300 people, it may have ended up in your spam folder. If you're having trouble finding it, for anybody who's having trouble finding it, or if you have friends that are looking for them, you can always, it's here, you know what, it's really easy. I can actually just skip the sending. I encourage you to write me an email though. I love getting emails, but just give me a second to focus on this.
I will do that. I will send you an email, and that's probably easier anyway than you trying to find
me typing it, right? And well, no, I'm not. It's an easy URL. So just it's rainbowresourcecenter.org and then /PWP-recordings. There, I've put it in the chat if you want to copy and paste it or look at it while you write it down. That's the thing about bulk emails, right? Like people just like the computers, they just don't want us to get them. So sometimes I'm happy. Hey, no problem. I've had some emails from people that can't find them, so maybe it's worth another go. So please, thanks for reminding me. Anybody else, please? I encourage questions. Okay. I'll go with the Pride Center of Edmonton hand that went up first. That's you.
That'll be Eric.
Okay. Oh, I see you're in two places. First of all, you're muted. You're muted. No,
yeah, you are muted, and I can't unmute you because I'm no longer a co-host.
So
how about we go ahead with Eric?
I should be here now.
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. No, that doesn't.
There. Oh, I see. Oh, you're in two places.
There's a lot of feedback coming through there, Eric.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Sorry about that, Eric. It seems like for those of you who are on the learning curve with this new thing, it seems that Rachel's computer and the Pride of Edmonton one unmute at the same time. So I'm not sure what that is about.
Eric, would you like to use the chat to write your comment? While you're doing that, does anyone else have any comments or questions for Ashley?
Joan, please. Yeah.
Hi, that was an amazing info session. Really loved it. And I totally recognize your smiling face from with Pride.
Oh, this is really great. I'm so glad that there were so many people there. That's fantastic.
It was really, really good. And you did an amazing job. I know that there was that one small glitch where we forgot to press record, but that was like such a minor.
Oh, it happened more than once, actually. It's all right. But
okay. Well, anyway, it was really awesome. You did a really good job, and the speakers were absolutely amazing. But I'm just curious about the word senior and older adults. I've been noticing that the word senior is kind of getting.
It's going away, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get that. And it's like, I kind of like it, I think.
Right.
I'm
Yeah,
just so
exactly.
used to senior, and you see it everywhere, right?
Right, exactly.
So
Yeah, exactly. We can talk about the syntax on that or semantics on that. I was just at a conference here in town the other day, and we were basically, the whole room was scolded, like, we need to stop using seniors. And it was like, okay, sorry, like, it does slip out every once in a while. I think it's because in this, like, it's seniors implies to the 65 plus older adults. My program runs with 55 plus. So I guess I'm trying to, like, narrow it down a little bit more when I say seniors, but you're right. Absolutely. It needs to, language, this, working with Rainbow Resource Center, it's all about the language. We got to be careful with
absolutely.
our words. I see
Yeah,
there's,
for sure.
yeah. Do you have anything else you wanted to add
No,
before
that's good. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. I see that I think it's Eric in the chat said he's impressed with the number of folks you have in your 55 plus group. We're always challenged to try to find interested senior adults. Any tips? So when I started with Rainbow, so a year and a half ago, like in March of 2021, it was there were 60 folks signed, like 60 folks on the email list, I'll say. And then in the time that I've been here, I've over doubled it. And so the trick is marketing and having people who are good at marketing and understanding social media. I know for many older adult groups out there, there are people who think that social media is a young person's game. But when you think about the older adult crowd who are 55 plus, we'll say 50 plus, they're still working. They still use social media. They can do it. They can go on the Facebook. I would recommend starting a campaign, do some outreach, do presentations at places, go to seniors' homes, talk to them. And what ends up happening is maybe one person hears, or maybe the daughter of a person hears, or, that's how you spread the word. We tried things like the traditional coffee news or, like, which is like a weekly paper periodical that you see in cafes, but it really didn't work for us. What works is social media, honestly. And then also, I have to say the consistency was a really big thing of it. Like weekly meetings that were reliable, that people could go to, and you create a safe space and don't work so hard on constructing, a structured conversation. Just maybe a couple of light rules. My rules are, we don't go to the dark side of politics. And if we talk about homelessness, we better solve it. And basically we just go from there because, honestly, people just want to talk about the good old days. So just let them do it. don't try to control it. It happens naturally, and that's the good part. Yeah, no, when we started back to in-person programming, it was 5 or 6 of us. Today there was 15 of us in there and just piled around a table, and it's such a great feeling. The quotes I hear from people are things like, it's like coming home again. This is the community I've been looking for years now. Or for some people who are just coming out, it's their first look at the community. And it's such a great place to create and to sustain. So if you ever, I have a background in communications. If you ever want to talk about communications and how to make it easy for yourself, again, my email is otr@rainbowresourcecenter.org. There's lots of easy ways to do it. So please reach out.
I see we're down to our final minute and a half.
Yeah, sorry about that. I did blab a bit there, but
Michael has his hand up. Are you quick, Michael?
Yeah. Ashley, are you aware of our historical program here about our site and our walks, historical walks showing places in the city as such? Did we?
I haven't heard about that. Maybe you could send me a link.
Some stuff.
Yeah, we've got one too where they're they need to get in touch with me too about communications.
Yeah.
I thank you everybody for this really great opportunity. I'm so glad that there were so many people here from Planning with Pride. That's so cool. Yeah, it's just nice to chat with you.
Well, Ashley, that was just really inspiring. Thank you very much. And I'm assuming you have no events that you want to advertise that.
I'm working on a museum exhibit right now. So if you're in Winnipeg for Pride next year, that's going to be when just come something to see.
Sounds very inspiring. Well, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. And I hope that we will see you next week when we will have Northern Heart, who will play their music, their beautiful music for us. If any of you want to go in person and join Larry and Eric, you can watch the performance at Sage in person. Masks will be required and there will be no food and no drink allowed.
Sounds fun.
and I think they're going to be in classroom C if you want to connect in person. And anyone can contact us at AgingwithPrideYEG@gmail.com. And thanks for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.